Sarah Martinez had dreamed of this day since she was 7 years old. Standing before the ornate mirror in the bridal suite of the Grand Palace Hotel, she adjusted her grandmother's pearl necklace one final time. The white satin dress hugged her figure perfectly, and the cathedral train spread behind her like ocean waves. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, adorned with tiny white flowers that matched the bouquet of roses, and baby's breath waiting on the nearby table. "You look absolutely stunning," whispered her maid of honor, Jessica, as she applied the final touches of lipstick to Sarah's trembling lips. The bride's hands shook slightly, not from nerves about marrying David, but from the overwhelming joy that threatened to spill over in tears she couldn't afford to shed without ruining her makeup. 3 floors below, the grand ballroom buzzed with anticipation. 250 guests had traveled from across the country to witness Sarah and David's union. The room was transformed into a fairy tale setting, with towering white columns wrapped in ivy, crystal chandeliers casting dancing shadows across, cream-colored linens and hundreds of white roses creating a pathway down the aisle. The sweet fragrance of jasmine filled the air from the elaborate floral arrangements that had cost Sarah's father, Miguel Martinez, 3 months of overtime pay at the construction company where he worked. David Thompson stood at the altar, adjusting his black bow tie for the 10th time in 5 minutes. His best man, his brother Michael, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. David's sandy brown hair was perfectly styled, and his dark eyes sparkled with excitement as he glanced toward the back of the ballroom, waiting for his bride to appear. They had been together for 4 years, meeting during their senior year at State University when they were both studying business. Their love story was the kind that made their friends believe in fairy tales again. The wedding planner, Mrs. Eleanor Winters, moved through the ballroom with military precision, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, clipboard in hand. She had been planning weddings for 35 years and prided herself on executing flawless events. Every detail had been meticulously arranged, from the timing of the processional music to the exact placement of each centerpiece. The caterers were preparing the reception dinner in the adjacent kitchen, the photographer was positioning himself for the perfect shots, and the string quartet had already begun playing soft classical melodies that floated through the room like whispers of romance. In the hotel's security office, however, something was troubling Marcus Webb, the head of security. A former police detective with 20 years of experience, Marcus had developed an instinct for sensing when something wasn't quite right. Earlier that morning, he had noticed unusual activity in the hotel's parking garage. A man in a dark jacket had been lingering near the service elevators, checking his watch repeatedly and speaking quietly into a phone. When Marcus had approached him, the man had quickly walked away, claiming he was lost and looking for the restroom. The Martinez family had spared no expense for their daughter's wedding. Miguel had worked double shifts for 2 years to save for this day, determined to give Sarah the wedding she deserved. His wife Carmen had spent months carefully selecting every detail, from the flavor of the 3-tiered cake to the color of the napkins. Sarah was their only daughter, the light of their lives, and they wanted everything to be perfect. The couple's love story had given hope to everyone who knew them, especially after David had proposed during a sunset picnic in the park, where they had their first date. As the ceremony time approached, guests began taking their seats. Sarah's college friends occupied the front rows on the left side, while David's family and co-workers filled the right. His parents, Robert and Helen Thompson, had flown in from Seattle, and his elderly grandmother had made the trip despite her doctor's concerns about her heart condition. Children in the family wore miniature versions of the wedding colors, navy blue and cream, and the flower girl, Sarah's 6-year-old niece Isabella, clutched her basket of rose petals with serious concentration. The photographer, Jake Morrison, moved silently through the crowd, capturing candid moments of anticipation. He had photographed over 300 weddings in his career, but there was something special about this one. The genuine happiness radiating from both families was palpable, and he found himself smiling behind his camera lens. The videographer set up his equipment to record the ceremony from multiple angles, knowing that someday Sarah and David would want to relive every precious moment of this day. Mrs. Winters checked her watch and noted it was 15 minutes before the ceremony would begin. She gave final instructions to the ushers, ensuring they knew how to properly escort the elderly guests and handle any last-minute seating arrangements. The string quartet transitioned to the prelude music, and a hush fell over the assembled guests as they realized the moment they had all been waiting for was nearly at hand. In the bridal suite, Sarah's mother, Carmen, helped her daughter with her veil, the same one Carmen had worn 30 years earlier when she married Miguel. The delicate lace had been carefully preserved and altered to fit Sarah perfectly. Tears of joy threatened to spill from Carmen's eyes as she looked at her beautiful daughter, remembering the little girl who used to play dress-up in her mother's high heels and practice walking down an imaginary aisle in their living room. The groomsmen assembled in the hallway outside the ballroom, straightening their ties and sharing nervous jokes to calm David's pre-ceremony jitters. His hands were steady now and his smile was confident. He had no doubts about spending the rest of his life with Sarah. She was his best friend, his confidant, and the woman who made him want to be a better man every single day. As the final minutes ticked away before the ceremony would begin, everyone involved felt the electric anticipation that comes with witnessing true love being celebrated. The grand ballroom had hosted thousands of events over the years, but today it would be the setting for a moment that would be remembered and cherished by everyone present for the rest of their lives. Or so they thought, unaware that in just a few short minutes their perfect day would take a terrifying turn that none of them could have imagined. The first sign that something was wrong came from an unexpected source. Hotel maintenance worker Carlos Rodriguez was performing his routine inspection of the ballroom's electrical systems when his metal detector began emitting an unusual beeping pattern. Carlos had worked at the Grand Palace Hotel for 15 years and knew every inch of the building's infrastructure. This particular sound was one he had never heard before, and it was coming from beneath one of the elegantly decorated tables, near the altar. Carlos crouched down, pushing aside the flowing cream-colored tablecloth. His weathered hands trembled as he discovered a small black device attached to the underside of the table, with industrial-grade tape. The device had blinking, red and green lights and appeared to be some kind of electronic equipment he didn't recognize. Wires extended from the main unit, snaking along the table leg and disappearing into a small hole that had been drilled into the floor. Without hesitation, Carlos pulled out his radio and contacted Marcus Webb in the security office. His voice was urgent but controlled as he described his discovery. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he listened to the description. In his years as a police detective, he had seen enough suspicious devices to know that this situation required immediate professional attention. Marcus quickly activated the hotel's emergency protocol while simultaneously contacting the local police department. Within minutes of his call, Detective Lieutenant Susan Hayes was speeding toward the Grand Palace Hotel with a team of specialized officers. Lieutenant Hayes was a veteran of the bomb squad and had dealt with numerous potentially explosive situations throughout her career. As she drove through the busy city streets, her mind raced through the possibilities of what they might be facing. Meanwhile, Mrs. Winters was growing concerned about the delay. She had noticed security personnel moving more frequently through the ballroom, and Carlos had approached her with a serious expression, requesting that she temporarily delay the ceremony start time. The wedding planner's professional instincts told her that something significant was happening, but she maintained her composure while discreetly informing Sarah's family that there would be a brief delay due to technical difficulties. In the EU bridal suite, Sarah was beginning to feel anxious about the delay. Jessica tried to keep her calm by suggesting they use the extra time for more photographs, but Sarah could sense the tension building in the hotel. She had noticed increased activity in the hallway outside her room, with staff members speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Her feminine intuition told her that something was seriously wrong, though she couldn't imagine what could be threatening her perfect day. Detective Hayes arrived at the hotel within 12 minutes of receiving the call, accompanied by a team that included bomb disposal expert Sergeant Mike Chen and communications specialist Officer Lisa Park. They immediately established a command center in the hotel's business office, away from the wedding guests who remained unaware of the developing situation. The team's first priority was to safely evacuate the ballroom without causing panic among the civilians. Sergeant Chen, a soft-spoken man with steady hands and nerves of steel, carefully examined the device that Carlos had discovered. Using specialized equipment, he determined that the device contained components consistent with an improvised explosive device. The wires leading into the floor suggested that there might be additional devices planted throughout the ballroom's infrastructure. His preliminary assessment indicated that the device was sophisticated and potentially very dangerous. Marcus Webb worked closely with the Special Forces team to develop an evacuation strategy. They needed to remove over 200 people from the ballroom quickly and quietly, without revealing the true nature of the emergency. The decision was made to inform the guests that there was a gas leak in the building that required immediate evacuation as a safety precaution. Mrs. Winters, despite her shock at learning the real reason for the evacuation, demonstrated remarkable professionalism. She calmly approached the microphone at the front of the ballroom and announced to the assembled guests that due to an unexpected maintenance issue, they needed to evacuate the building temporarily. Her voice remained steady and reassuring as she directed people toward the exits in an orderly fashion. The evacuation process was complicated by the presence of elderly guests and small children. David's grandmother, Helen, required assistance, walking, and was helped by two ushers who stayed calm despite their own growing concern about the situation. The flower girl Isabella began crying when she realized something was wrong, and her mother quickly scooped her up and carried her toward the exit. As guests filed out of the ballroom, they gathered in the hotel's parking lot, confused and concerned about what was happening. Many assumed it was a minor problem that would be resolved quickly, allowing the ceremony to proceed as planned. David found his way to Sarah's side, and together they stood among their family and friends, watching as emergency vehicles began arriving at the hotel. Officer Park established communication with federal authorities, as the sophisticated nature of the device suggested possible terrorist involvement. The FBI's regional office was contacted, and Agent Rachel Torres was dispatched to the scene with additional specialists. The investigation was rapidly expanding beyond a local police matter into a potential federal case. Inside the hotel, Sergeant Chen continued his careful examination of the device and the surrounding area. Using fiber optic cameras, he discovered that the wires led to at least 3 additional devices strategically placed throughout the ballroom's support structure. The positioning suggested that whoever had planted the devices had intimate knowledge of the building's architecture and had planned the attack carefully. Carlos Rodriguez, who had first discovered the device, was interviewed by Detective Hayes about any unusual activity he might have observed in recent days. He recalled seeing unfamiliar maintenance workers in the building over the past week, individuals he didn't recognize despite knowing most of the regular contractors. One man in particular had seemed suspicious, asking detailed questions about the ballroom's electrical system and taking photographs with his phone. The wedding vendors, including the caterers and florists, were also questioned about whether they had noticed anything unusual during their setup. The florist mentioned that someone had moved several of her arrangements the previous evening, claiming to be with the hotel staff, though she hadn't recognized the individual. These small details were beginning to form a pattern that suggested the attack had been planned well in advance. As the afternoon sun began to set, it became clear that Sarah and David's wedding day had become something entirely different than anyone had imagined. The couple stood together in the parking lot, still in their wedding attire, watching as their dream day transformed into a crime scene investigation that would change their lives forever. FBI agent Rachel Torres arrived at the Grand Palace Hotel with a team of federal investigators and advanced bomb disposal equipment. A woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and graying temples, Agent Torres had spent 15 years investigating domestic terrorism cases. She immediately took charge of the scene, coordinating with local law enforcement and establishing a wider perimeter around the hotel to ensure public safety. The complexity of the device placement became more apparent as Sergeant Chen's team conducted a thorough sweep of the ballroom. Using sophisticated detection equipment, they identified a total of 6 devices connected by an intricate network of wires running through the building's infrastructure. The placement was methodical and strategic, designed to cause maximum structural damage and casualties. The discovery sent chills through the experienced bomb disposal team. Agent Torres interviewed Marcus Webb about the suspicious individual he had observed earlier that morning. The hotel's security cameras had captured images of the man, And the eye? FBI's facial recognition software was already running comparisons against known terrorist databases. The man appeared to be of Middle Eastern descent, approximately 35 years old, with distinctive facial scarring that suggested previous involvement in violent activities. Sarah sat in the back of an ambulance, still wearing her wedding dress but wrapped in an emergency blanket. The reality of the situation was slowly sinking in, and she found herself alternating between disbelief and terror. David never left her side, holding her hand and whispering reassurances. Though his own face was pale with shock, their families gathered around them, creating a protective circle of love and support in the midst of the chaos. The investigation revealed that the devices were set to detonate at exactly 3:30 p.m., which would have been the precise moment when Sarah and David were exchanging vows. The timing was not coincidental. Someone had studied their wedding schedule carefully and planned the attack to coincide with the most emotional and crowded moment of the ceremony. The realization that they had been specifically targeted sent shockwaves through both families. Detective Hayes worked with the FBI's cybercrimes unit to trace the electronic components used in the devices. The sophisticated timer mechanisms and remote detonation capabilities indicated the involvement of someone with advanced technical knowledge and access to military-grade equipment. The investigation was expanding rapidly as federal agencies shared intelligence about similar device signatures from other cases. Carlos Rodriguez was praised for his quick thinking and attention to detail that had prevented a catastrophe. The maintenance worker, a father of 3, had simply been doing his routine job when he stumbled upon what could have been one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in the city's history. His hands still shook as he recounted the moment of discovery to investigators, knowing that hundreds of lives had been saved by his diligence. The hotel's guest list and vendor records were thoroughly examined for any connections to known terrorist organizations or suspicious individuals. Mrs. Winters provided detailed records of everyone who had access to the ballroom during the setup period, including caterers, florists, musicians, and maintenance staff. The FBI began the painstaking process of verifying the identities and backgrounds of every person who had been in the building during the past week. As evening approached, the bomb disposal team made the delicate decision to attempt to disarm the devices. Sergeant Chen, wearing full protective gear, worked methodically to disconnect the complex network of wires and timers. The process required absolute precision, as any mistake could trigger the entire system. The surrounding blocks were evacuated as a precautionary measure, and emergency medical teams stood ready for any outcome. The local news media had gathered outside the police perimeter, reporting on the developing story of the thwarted wedding day attack. Sarah and David found themselves at the center of a national news story. Their romantic wedding day transformed into a tale of terrorism and heroism. Reporters clamored for interviews, but the FBI maintained strict control over information release to protect the ongoing investigation. Agent Torres received word from the FBI's counterterrorism division that the facial recognition search had produced a match. The suspicious man photographed at the hotel was identified as Ahmad Hassan, a known associate of international terrorist cells with a history of bomb-making activities. An immediate manhunt was launched, with law enforcement agencies across the region alerted to be on the lookout for Hassan and any known associates. The discovery of Hassan's identity provided crucial leads for the investigation. His phone records showed communication with contacts in 3 different countries, suggesting the attack was part of a larger international terrorism network. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force was activated, bringing together agents from multiple agencies to coordinate the response and prevent any additional attacks. Sarah's father, Miguel, struggled to understand why his daughter's wedding would be targeted by terrorists. As an immigrant who had worked hard to achieve the American dream, he felt personally violated by the attack on his family's celebration. His wife Carmen clung to him, tears streaming down her face as she watched their daughter's special day dissolve into a nightmare of investigation and fear. The string quartet, still in their formal performance attire, sat in the hotel lobby giving statements to investigators. They recalled seeing unfamiliar individuals in the ballroom during their sound check the previous evening. people who claimed to be with the catering staff but seemed more interested in the room's layout than the food service areas. These observations provided additional pieces to the puzzle that investigators were frantically trying to solve. Hotel management worked closely with law enforcement to review weeks of security footage, searching for any appearances by Hassan or his associates. The painstaking review revealed that Hassan had visited the hotel on at least 3 separate occasions, each time using different disguises and false identification. His knowledge of the building's layout and security procedures suggested extensive surveillance and planning. As Sergeant Chen continued his dangerous work disarming the devices, the wedding guests remained in the parking lot, many still in their formal attire, watching their loved one's celebration turn into a crime scene. The surreal nature of the situation was overwhelming for everyone involved, as they tried to process how a day of joy and love had become a matter of life and death. The realization that they had all been just minutes away from potential tragedy created a bond among the wedding guests that would last for the rest of their lives. The breakthrough in the investigation came when Agent Torres received a call from the FBI's Intelligence Division. Ahmad Hassan had been spotted at a truck stop 40 miles outside the city, apparently preparing to flee the area. A coordinated response was immediately launched, involving local SWAT teams, federal agents, and helicopter support. The manhunt had become the highest priority operation in the region. Sergeant Chen successfully disarmed the first device after 3 hours of painstaking work. The mechanism was more sophisticated than initially believed, incorporating backup triggers and anti-tampering measures designed to prevent exactly what he was attempting. His success provided crucial insights into the construction methods used, helping his team approach the remaining 5 devices with better understanding of their design. At the truck stop, Ahmad Hassan was captured without resistance as he attempted to board a long-distance bus heading toward the Canadian border. His backpack contained detailed floor plans of the Grand Palace Hotel, photographs of Sarah and David from their engagement announcement in the local newspaper, and communication equipment linking him to terrorist cells in 3 countries. The arrest provided immediate relief to the investigation team, though many questions remained unanswered. Sarah and David made the difficult decision to postpone their wedding indefinitely. The trauma of the day's events had left them emotionally drained, and the ballroom where they had planned to exchange vows was now a federal crime scene that would remain sealed for weeks. Their honeymoon flight to Hawaii was canceled, and their families began the heartbreaking process of contacting vendors and guests to explain the unthinkable circumstances. The interrogation of Ahmad Hassan revealed disturbing details about the planned attack. He claimed to be part of an international network that specifically targeted American celebrations as symbols of Western culture and freedom. The wedding had been chosen randomly from public engagement announcements, making Sarah and David innocent victims of a broader ideological conflict they had never imagined being part of. Hassan's computer, seized from his hotel room across town, contained research on multiple wedding venues and events throughout the region. The FBI discovered that the attack on Sarah and David's wedding was just one of several planned strikes against civilian celebrations. The scope of the terrorist plot expanded far beyond what anyone had initially suspected, requiring a massive federal response to prevent additional attacks. The bomb disposal team worked through the night to safely disarm all 6 devices. Each one required specialized techniques and careful documentation for the criminal investigation. The explosives were powerful enough to have brought down the entire ballroom structure, potentially killing everyone present and causing damage to adjacent buildings. The magnitude of the tragedy that had been prevented became increasingly clear with each device that was rendered safe. Mrs. Winters, despite her decades of experience handling wedding crises, found herself completely unprepared for the situation she now faced. She worked tirelessly to help coordinate the return of wedding gifts, cancel vendor contracts, and manage the flood of media requests. Her professional network rallied around her, offering support and assistance in dealing with the unprecedented circumstances. The wedding photographer, Jake Morrison, found that his images from the early part of the day had become crucial evidence in the investigation. His candid shots of the ballroom setup revealed the presence of individuals who were later identified as Hassan's associates. The FBI requested copies of every photograph he had taken, transforming his artistic work into criminal evidence. Carmen Martinez struggled with overwhelming guilt, wondering if there was something the family could have done differently to prevent the targeting of their daughter's wedding. Agent Torres spent time counseling the family, explaining that they were innocent victims of random selection by terrorists who specifically chose public celebrations to maximize psychological impact on communities. David's family faced their own emotional challenges as they tried to process the events. His elderly grandmother, Helen, suffered a mild heart episode due to the stress and was hospitalized for observation. The family's joy and anticipation had been replaced by fear and confusion as they grappled with the reality that their loved ones had been targeted by international terrorists. The investigation revealed that Hassan had been in the country for 6 months, working various temporary jobs while planning multiple attacks. His visa had been obtained through fraudulent documents, and he had been living under an assumed identity. The case highlighted serious gaps in immigration security and terrorist screening procedures that would later lead to significant policy changes. Local law enforcement agencies worked around the clock to verify the backgrounds of everyone who had been present at the hotel during the setup period. The painstaking process revealed 2 additional individuals with connections to Hassan's network, leading to more arrests and the discovery of weapons caches hidden in storage units across the city. The full extent of the terrorist cell's activities was far more extensive than initially realized. Sarah and David's love story, which had begun as a fairy tale romance, had become a symbol of resilience in the face of terrorism. Their willingness to share their experience with federal investigators helped prevent other attacks and led to the dismantling of an international terrorist network. The couple found strength in each other and in the knowledge that their traumatic experience had potentially saved many other innocent lives. The Grand Palace Hotel faced its own crisis as the investigation revealed security vulnerabilities that had been exploited by the terrorists. Management implemented extensive security upgrades and worked closely with federal agencies to develop new protocols for protecting large events. The hotel's reputation and business were significantly impacted, though the heroic actions of their staff members like Carlos Rodriguez were widely praised. As the investigation continued to unfold, it became clear that the thwarted wedding attack was just the beginning of a much larger story. The capture of Hassan and his associates had disrupted a sophisticated terrorist network that had been planning attacks across multiple states. The FBI's counterterrorism division launched a comprehensive operation to track down all individuals connected to the network and prevent any additional planned attacks. The media coverage of the story focused not only on the terrorist plot, but also on the love story of Sarah and David, whose wedding day had become a symbol of American resilience. Their decision to eventually proceed with their marriage, despite the trauma they had experienced, inspired people across the country and demonstrated that love and hope could triumph over fear and hatred. 3 months after the failed terrorist attack, Sarah and David found themselves testifying before a federal grand jury. The process of reliving that traumatic day was emotionally exhausting, but they understood the importance of their testimony in ensuring that Ahmad Hassan and his associates received the maximum sentences possible. Their courage in facing the legal system head-on impressed prosecutors and helped build an airtight case against the terrorist network. The FBI's investigation had expanded internationally, with cooperation from intelligence agencies in 7 countries. Hassan's confession led to the identification of terrorist cells in Europe and the Middle East, resulting in dozens of arrests and the prevention of attacks on civilian targets across 3 continents. What had begun as a threat to one wedding had uncovered a global network planning coordinated attacks on Western celebrations and gatherings. Sarah had been receiving counseling to deal with the post-traumatic stress from the experience. Simple activities like attending social gatherings or being in crowded spaces triggered anxiety attacks that left her feeling vulnerable and afraid. David struggled with his own emotional responses, particularly feelings of guilt that he hadn't been able to protect Sarah from the trauma, even though the threat had been completely beyond his control. The couple decided to proceed with their wedding, but in a completely different setting. Instead of a large ballroom celebration, they chose an intimate ceremony in Sarah's childhood church, with only immediate family members present. The simple private ceremony was held 6 months after the original planned date, with heightened security provided discreetly by federal agents who had become personally invested in their story. Carlos Rodriguez, the maintenance worker whose vigilance had saved hundreds of lives, was honored by the city with a medal for civilian heroism. The recognition helped him cope with his own trauma from discovering the devices, though he continued to have nightmares about what might have happened if he had been just a few minutes later in his routine inspection. His family was proud of his heroism, but worried about the psychological impact the experience had on him. Mrs. Eleanor Winters decided to retire from wedding planning after 35 years in the business. The trauma of nearly losing hundreds of people at an event she had organized was too much for her to bear. She spent her final months in the business working with other event planners to develop security protocols that would help prevent similar attacks in the future. Her expertise and experience became invaluable in creating industry standards for event security. Agent Rachel Torres received commendation from the FBI director for her handling of the case, which had become a textbook example of interagency, cooperation, and crisis management. The successful prevention of the attack and subsequent dismantling of the terrorist network was considered one of the most significant counterterrorism victories of the decade. Torres used her experience to train other agents in recognizing and responding to similar threats. The Grand Palace Hotel struggled financially in the aftermath of the incident. Many potential clients canceled their events, fearful of holding large gatherings at a location that had been targeted by terrorists. The hotel's management invested heavily in security upgrades and worked with federal agencies to become a model for venue security. But the reputation damage took years to overcome. Some employees, traumatized by the experience, found new jobs, rather than return to work at the hotel. Hassan's trial became a highly publicized case that drew national attention to the issue of domestic terrorism and immigration security. His conviction on charges of conspiracy to commit terrorism, attempted mass murder, and weapons violations resulted in multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The trial also led to the conviction of 6 associates who had helped plan and prepare for the attacks. The wedding vendors who had been working at the hotel that day each dealt with the trauma differently. The florist, who had unknowingly interacted with one of Hassan's associates, suffered from anxiety and had difficulty trusting new clients. The string quartet disbanded after several members decided they could no longer perform at large events. The photographer, Jake Morrison, donated his services to photograph Sarah and David's eventual wedding ceremony as a gesture of solidarity and healing. Sarah's parents, Miguel and Carmen Martinez, struggled with complex emotions about the American dream they had worked so hard to achieve. The attack made them question whether their adopted country was truly safe for their family, but ultimately reinforced their belief in the values of freedom and justice that had drawn them to America. Miguel returned to work with a new appreciation for the everyday heroes like Carlos Rodriguez, who kept communities safe. David's family dealt with their own challenges, particularly his elderly grandmother Helen, who never fully recovered from the stress of the evacuation. Her health declined steadily in the months following the incident, and she passed away peacefully 8 months later. The family took comfort in knowing that she had lived to see David and Sarah safely married in their small church ceremony. The investigation revealed that the terrorist network had been monitoring social media and local newspaper announcements to identify potential targets. This discovery led to new guidelines for couples announcing their engagements and wedding plans publicly, as well as increased awareness among law enforcement about the vulnerability of civilian celebrations to terrorist attacks. Sarah and David's story inspired legislative changes in immigration security and event venue safety regulations. Their willingness to testify before Congress about their experience helped lawmakers understand the real human impact of terrorism and the importance of preventing such attacks. The couple became reluctant but effective advocates for improved security measures and counterterrorism efforts. The psychological impact on the wedding guests who had been evacuated from the hotel varied significantly. Some were able to move on relatively quickly, while others experienced lasting anxiety about attending large gatherings. A support group was formed for those affected by the incident, providing a forum for people to share their experiences and help each other heal from the collective trauma. As the first anniversary of the thwarted attack approached, Sarah and David faced media requests for interviews and commemorative articles about their experience. They struggled with balancing their desire for privacy with their sense of responsibility to share their story as a testament to the resilience of love in the face of hatred. Their decision to speak publicly about their experience helped other victims of terrorism find strength and hope in their own healing processes. The case became a studied example in law enforcement training programs, demonstrating the importance of routine security procedures and the vigilance of civilian employees in preventing terrorist attacks. Carlos Rodriguez's quick thinking and the professional response of the bomb disposal team became the gold standard for how such situations should be handled, potentially saving lives in future incidents. 5 years after the failed terrorist attack, Sarah and David Thompson celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary by returning to the city, where their lives had been forever changed. They had moved to a quiet suburban town immediately after their small church wedding, seeking peace and anonymity away from the media attention and painful memories. Now, with 2 young children and successful careers, they felt ready to confront the past and find closure. The Grand Palace Hotel had undergone extensive renovations and was operating under new management with state-of-the-art security systems. The ballroom where their wedding was supposed to take place had been completely redesigned, with no trace remaining of the room where they had nearly lost their lives. Hotel management invited the couple for a private dinner in the renovated space, hoping to demonstrate that the location had been transformed from a place of terror into a symbol of renewal and hope. Carlos Rodriguez had become the hotel's head of security, promoted after his heroic actions and his commitment to preventing similar incidents. His expertise in threat detection had made him a valuable consultant to other venues across the region. When he met with Sarah and David during their visit, his eyes filled with tears as he hugged the couple whose lives he had saved. He showed them pictures of his own children, who had been born in the years since the incident, and spoke about how that day had given him a new perspective on the precious nature of life. Agent Rachel Torres had been promoted to head the FBI's Domestic Counterterrorism Division. Largely based on her successful handling of the wedding attack case, she maintained periodic contact with Sarah and David, updating them on the ongoing efforts to combat terrorism and the impact their case had had on preventing other attacks. The intelligence gathered from Hassan's network had led to the prevention of 17 additional planned attacks across North America and Europe. Ahmad Hassan remained in federal prison, serving multiple life sentences in solitary confinement. His terrorist network had been completely dismantled, with dozens of associates arrested and convicted in various countries. Occasionally, Hassan attempted to send messages to Sarah and David through prison correspondence, but these communications were intercepted by authorities and never reached the couple. The FBI assured them that Hassan would never have the opportunity to harm anyone again. Mrs. Eleanor Winters had indeed retired from wedding planning, but had found new purpose in her later years by establishing a foundation that provided security, consultation services to event venues free of charge. Her organization had helped hundreds of hotels, churches, and community centers implement safety protocols that could detect and prevent terrorist threats. She stayed in touch with Sarah and David, sending them anniversary cards each year and celebrating their resilience. The couple's children, 3-year-old Emma and 18-month-old Michael, were too young to understand the significance of their parents' story. But Sarah and David had already begun thinking about how they would eventually explain the events that had shaped their family's history. They wanted their children to understand the importance of vigilance and community service, as well as the power of love to overcome hatred and fear. Detective Lieutenant Susan Hayes had retired from law enforcement and written a book about the case titled Moments from Disaster: How Ordinary Heroes Prevent Extraordinary Tragedies. The book became a bestseller and was used in training programs for law enforcement agencies worldwide. She donated a portion of the proceeds to victim assistance programs and maintained friendships with many of the people involved in the case. The string quartet that was supposed to perform at the original wedding had eventually reunited and now specialized in security-conscious events for high-profile clients. They had developed protocols for quickly evacuating venues while maintaining calm through their music, turning their traumatic experience into expertise that helped other event professionals handle emergency situations. Jake Morrison, the wedding photographer, had become a documentary photographer specializing in stories of resilience and survival. His photo series about the people affected by the thwarted terrorist attack won several national awards and was exhibited in galleries across the country. He maintained a close friendship with Sarah and David, documenting their family's growth and healing journey over the years. The small church where Sarah and David eventually held their wedding ceremony had become something of a pilgrimage site for couples who had experienced trauma or terrorism. The pastor, Father Michael O'Brien, had developed a special ministry for people affected by violence, using Sarah and David's story as an example of how faith and love could triumph over hatred and fear. The couple occasionally returned to speak, with other couples facing similar challenges. Sarah had channeled her experience into a career as a victim advocate, working with federal agencies to help other terrorism survivors navigate the complex emotional and legal aftermath of attacks. Her first-hand understanding of the trauma and her natural empathy made her incredibly effective at helping others heal. She often spoke at conferences about the long-term psychological effects of terrorism on civilian populations. David had used his business degree to establish a nonprofit organization that provided financial assistance to families affected by terrorism. The organization helped cover counseling costs, legal fees, and other expenses that victims often faced in the aftermath of attacks. His work had helped hundreds of families across the country rebuild their lives after experiencing unimaginable trauma. Miguel Martinez had become a community leader in his neighborhood, working with local law enforcement to establish citizen watch programs and emergency response protocols. His experience as the father of a terrorism target had given him unique insights into community vulnerability and the importance of neighbors looking out for each other. Carmen had become involved in immigrant support services, helping new Americans understand their rights and responsibilities. The case had led to significant changes in federal immigration and security policies. The gaps that had allowed Hassan and his associates to enter and operate in the country were systematically addressed through new screening procedures and intelligence-sharing protocols. The Department of Homeland Security cited the wedding attack case as a turning point in their approach to preventing domestic terrorism. On this 5th anniversary visit, Sarah and David decided to hold a small memorial service for the victims of terrorism worldwide. They gathered with Carlos Rodriguez, Agent Torres, and several other people who had been part of their story in the renovated ballroom of the Grand Palace Hotel. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, honoring not only what they had survived, but also those who had not been as fortunate in other attacks. As they stood in the space where they had almost died, Sarah and David reflected on how the experience had ultimately strengthened their relationship and given them a deeper appreciation for life's precious moments. They had learned that love was not just about joy and celebration, but also about standing together in the face of unimaginable challenges and finding meaning in even the darkest experiences. Their story had become a symbol of hope for other terrorism survivors, demonstrating that it was possible to move beyond victimhood and create positive change from traumatic experiences. The couple had received thousands of letters over the years from people who had been inspired by their resilience and their commitment to helping others heal from similar traumas. As they prepared to leave the hotel and return to their quiet suburban life, Sarah and David made a commitment to continue sharing their story as long as it could help others. They understood that their wedding day, which had begun as a personal celebration of love, had become something much larger, a testament to the power of human resilience, the importance of community vigilance, and the ultimate triumph of love over hatred. The final chapter of their story was still being written, not in the dramatic terms of terrorism and investigation, but in the quiet, everyday victories of raising children, building careers, and maintaining the love that had brought them together in the first place. Their greatest achievement was not surviving the attack, but creating a meaningful life together in its aftermath, proving that terrorism could never truly defeat the human spirit's capacity for love, hope, and renewal.